Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
Let's do it. Are y'all ready?
All right. I'm ready to go.
Hey, what's up, Blazer fans? Welcome to the Blazers Edge podcast. I am Tara Bowen-Biggs here, as always, with Blazers outsider Danny Marang.
Well, hi. How are things?
They are good, and I'm very excited to have a third person join us tonight because, Dan, it's been great talking to you all these months, but it's time to shake it up a little bit. Time to get ready for training camp to get started, and to do that, we got to bring in a little extra help. So why don't you introduce Sean?
One of the blog boys, one of the great ones, my guy, Sean Highkin, who is actively covering the NBA for Bleacher Report, Portland local, has been on the beat for the Chicago Bulls. Sean, thanks for coming on, dude.
Thanks for having me on. Tara, you really didn't have to lie and say that it was great talking to Dan by yourself the whole time. Really, that was very unconvincing the way you did that.
Really? Huh? Yeah, so it's gonna be like this, huh?
Uh-huh. Oh. What did you think when you brought him on?
I don't know. The last time I wasn't on the podcast, you had him on, and it's been a while. But we're ready to get started tonight. And one of the reasons that I was excited to bring in somebody else, because you and I, this time last week, Dan, were confused enough as it was about the Timberwolves, and things haven't gotten any clearer. So we got to find out if anybody else has an idea what's going on.
Yeah, let's go back a week. Like we said that, hey, this meeting that's coming up is going to make or break what happens to the Timberwolves. Like if they figured it out, there would be some repercussions, but they'd find a way to get it done. And if they didn't, it was going to go full apocalypse. Well, here we are. Apocalypse now, baby. It's, yeah. I mean, I didn't think it was going to devolve into, the dark side of the NBA locker room kind of leaking out into the public eye. But, yeah, it went from 0 to 100 real quick. And I guess the unique aspect here is that Sean has covered both Jimmy and Tibbs in the past, so he's got some perspective on both those guys. And as working as a reporter in the world, you kind of hear some of the things that go on in the back channels of the social life. So we can kind of expand upon some of the things we've seen on social media over the last week too. So this is gonna be an interesting next couple of days.
Let's put a little context
just
in
on the Jimmy Butler perspective.
Where we are in time right now. It's Sunday evening. It's because everything could change tomorrow, or everything could change in an hour. So as of what we know right now, how about, let's see, I'll give Sean the opportunity. Can you summarize where we are in this story right now as we're talking about what is going on with the Timberwolves? Not that I want this to be a Timberwolves podcast, but this is just too rich to not talk about.
Well, so there's been rumblings the whole summer, and even dating back into last season, that Jimmy Butler and Karl Anthony-Towns didn't exactly get along last year, which was Jimmy's first year in Minnesota. They make the playoffs for the first time since 2004, and so people kind of see the season as a success, but then, they get bounced in the first round by Houston pretty quickly, and then there's kind of these reports of this tension between them, and it's kind of awkward because Jimmy's going to be a free agent next summer, and Towns has this super max 5-year, $190 million extension that he could sign. And so that's kind of like this subplot that's going on, but everybody kind of assumes that they're going to figure it out because Jimmy Butler is a Tom Thibodeau guy because, they were together in Chicago for all those years. So early last week, Jimmy Butler meets with Tom Thibodeau in L.A. It was originally going to be in Minnesota, but he made Tom fly out to L.A. to talk about the future, and that ended with basically Jimmy saying, I don't want to re-sign here, I want to be traded. And he gave him a list of 3 teams, which are the Clippers, the Knicks, and the Nets, that he wants to be traded to. And then, Thibodeau, because this is how he is, he's not the kind of guy who is going to want to, trade one of his guys, because he and Jimmy go so far back to those Chicago years. He doesn't want to trade one of his guys, and he also doesn't want to get worse in the short term because he's also kind of trying to fight for his own job. And so, he's resistant to it. But now kind of where we are is, he requests a trade. Andrew Wiggins' brother tweets hallelujah, and then that gets into like a back and forth between Andrew Wiggins and his brother Nick and Steven Jackson on Instagram for some reason.
Yeah, how did Steven Jackson get involved in all of this?
Because he's Captain Jack and he can do what he wants.
He was just bored and decided he wanted to get on Instagram and you know what he basically is like? You know how like whenever like those like videos that are like reaction videos that like people put up on YouTube where it's like Eminem disses Machine Gun Kelly. This is my reaction video, and it's just some dude talking about it. That's basically what Steven Jackson is now. He's a vlogger. And
ESPN gave him this license. Like by putting him on TV, they gave him this license to do this.
Right, and so then Wiggins puts out like his response on his Instagram story, and then Steven Jackson comes out with his own response when he blows like a whole bunch of weed smoke before he talks about how like I'll catch you in traffic, make sure you come correct or whatever. And then a couple days later, Glenn Taylor, the owner of the Timberwolves, basically steps in and like. Because Thibodeau and Scott Layden had been telling teams, no, Jimmy's not available. We're not going to trade him. And Glenn Taylor steps in and is like, no, we don't want this hanging over us the whole season. Get this done now. And so now basically, and then in the midst of all this, Karl Anthony-Towns signs his Supermax extension.
Which is the pettiest thing imaginable.
Right.
And I love it.
Yeah, literally as soon as Glenn Taylor steps in and says, we have to trade Jimmy. Now Karl Towns is like, okay, yeah, I'll sign for all this guaranteed money that I was never going to turn down regardless of how any of it worked.
That's Cat saying, hey, Glenn, it's him or me. It's him or me. Like he basically went with the ultimatum. And as soon as he got his answer, he's like, okay, it's me. Let me sign.
Right, right. And so now we're basically at, Media Day is tomorrow. Whenever you guys put this out, I think you guys are putting this out like around the time Media Day starts. But Jimmy Butler is not going to be at Media Day. He's been given permission to skip Media Day. He's been given permission to skip the beginning of training camp because if he's there, it's just going to be awkward. And so I think the thought is that they're hoping to get a deal done sometime in the next few days so that it's a little of a distraction as possible. And then I don't really know what the market is for him right now. It seems like there's a lot of teams bidding for it, but like Miami has kind of come up a lot. The Clippers you think are going to be involved. The Knicks were on his list, but I don't think the Knicks are really going to give up a lot at this point because they feel like they can just sign him this summer. But there are going to be some other dark horse teams involved. But it's a whole mess.
It's really something. I've so many questions and so many thoughts on it. But one of the questions that I have for you, Sean, is. Have you in the years that you've been covering the league, like, have you been around, like, what's the most dysfunction you've been around? I mean, this seems like pretty high for the people who are trying to follow what is going on with this team. Can you recall other similar situations?
Well, as far as teams that I've covered, by far the most dysfunctional one was 2 seasons ago, which was my last year on the Bulls beat, the 2016-17 season, which was the Rondo Wade Butler year. This is in January of that year. They blew a 10-point lead in the final 3 minutes of the game to the Hawks. And then after the game, Dwayne Wade in the locker room basically says, some of these guys have to decide whether they want to win. Basically just like he rips all of the young players on the team. And Jimmy is like listening to him at the edge of the scrum while we're in. And then we go to Jimmy. And Jimmy basically says all the exact same stuff as Wade. It's almost like they premeditated what their talking points were going to be with each other. Basically, just systematically saying that all the other young guys, on the team just don't want it enough and aren't true competitors and all this stuff. And so then over the course of that night, some of the young guys like Jerian Grant and Isaiah Cannon and Bobby Portis are tweeting in defense of themselves over the night, basically because they kind of heard what those guys said. And then the next day, Rajon Rondo puts out an Instagram post that's of him, a picture of him with Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce from when they were on the Celtics together. And it was this whole thing about my vets didn't call out their teammates and pass the blame off. It was a whole thing. He basically just ripped Jimmy and Wade for basically for ripping all the young guys. And then, the next morning at shoot-around, Jimmy and Wade both kind of came out and said, we should have done this through the media or whatever. They all kind of deflected it. And Rondo comes out and he's like, yeah, I said what I said. I don't hide from any of it. I don't regret any of it, which was just the most classic Rondo response. And then that night, Hoiberg says, we're going to punish these guys. They're going to Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade aren't going to start. And so they don't start. But then they just come off the bench at like 5 minutes, and then they play their normal minutes the rest of the rotation. It was like really it was not a good look really for anybody except for Rondo. Rondo's the only guy that came out of that whole thing looking good.
So I don't recall hearing much about that team afterwards. So I mean that team did not flourish under under those situations. They
made the playoffs. They would have beaten the Celtics in the first round as the 8th seed if Rondo hadn't broken his thumb.
So do you think that
was the weirdest team?
Do you think that this beef that played out, do you think it affected on court?
Hello, can you guys hear me?
I can now.
Okay.
I thought maybe that was a terrible question to ask.
No, start that question. Start the question. No, you cut out for a second. Start the question again.
Okay. So, do you think that this beef carried out on the court?
In the short term, it did, but that Bulls team was so inconsistent anyway, and that roster was so poorly constructed. Like, they thought that Rajon Rondo, Jimmy Butler, and Dwayne Wade would somehow all be able to fit together, and they had nobody else. They had like no other playable point guards besides Rondo. That was just a weird year all around. I don't know if I'll ever cover a team weirder than that one.
This 2019 Timberwolves is starting off pretty weird too. And I want to make it clear that I'm not I feel really bad for the people who are Minnesota fans. And so I'm not laughing at them. This whole situation is so ridiculous. And it's so much it's so typical of the NBA that at any moment we could be all of a sudden blindsided by some crazy story just like this. You know what I mean? It's like, I feel like we're always sort of right on the edge. Like every fan base is sort of always right on the edge of something just going completely sideways. Like we never would have predicted this, what happened to San Antonio happening to them. And if it can happen to San Antonio, it can happen to anybody.
Okay, so basically the whole idea of that Bulls team, that 2016-17 Bulls team that you covered, Sean, I mean, that team was kind of a throwaway team. It was kind of a transition year, whereas this Minnesota team was – they're supposed to be building towards something. Like Jimmy was supposed to be the guy that they had the foundation upon that provided the things that Wiggins was probably, in all honesty, supposed to provide alongside Cat. And, I mean, they gave up Dunn. They gave up Markkanen. They gave up Levine. If they lose Butler for scraps here, and that's the thing, is because this is such a complete and utter disaster piece, the Timberwolves have zero leverage. Like the way that Jimmy has manipulated the situation, that the Timberwolves, the fact that they are going to get even a decent player out of this will be impressive. Now, the most prominent name that I've heard thrown around kind of not so quietly is Richardson from Miami. And that would be a good get. Like, Richardson's a nice player. He projects going forward to be a Butler-esque kind of player. I don't know if he'll ever hit the star quality kind of level, but that's a tier down from, say, a Portland offering a CJ McCollum. And that's why I've heard that Portland's involved, but CJ's not on the table.
I don't feel like in a situation like this, you offer CJ. Like you just said.
You don't.
Minnesota's got no power.
Jimmy Butler is a top 10 to 12 player in the league. You put CJ McCollum on the table if that's the kind of guy that you're getting, even if it's if you were Portland, if you were going to make that trade, it would kind of be the same gamble that the Raptors just made in trading for Kawhi Leonard. Basically, they're going to, they just ran back the team that they had for all those years. They had a really good regular season and then fizzled out in the playoffs. And then they basically said, okay, we're going to take a swing. We're going to trade our, beloved, one of our franchise guys for Kawhi Leonard. He didn't say he wants to re-sign here, but we're going to see if it works. If he re-signs long-term, great. We'll keep going forward with this core. If not, maybe we'll just blow it up and rebuild. I feel like with the Blazers, the play would be you take a huge gamble. You trade CJ for Jimmy Butler because otherwise you're running back with basically the same team that you had last year, except you don't have Ed Davis anymore. You have Seth Curry and who else did they sign? They signed somebody else this summer.
You have Stauskas.
Yeah, Stauskas, right? Yeah, that's your team. Like your ceiling is basically what they were last year, which is a decent regular season team that loses in the first round. So if you trade for a guy like Jimmy Butler, he fits better next to Damian Lillard because he's a better defender. You can play him in some interesting combinations with like Aminu, and in the front court you can play Jimmy at some 4 if you want to, and he's another guy who can make plays. It would be an interesting fit. So you take that gamble on him deciding that he wants to stay. If he decides to leave, then maybe you look at, okay, do we trade Dame and rebuild? That would kind of be the gamble that you make. Now, I'm not at all surprised that Neil Olshey is not interested in trading CJ for this, because then, the downside of if this doesn't work, then he would have to, he would maybe have to rebuild. He doesn't want to do that. But if Portland is involved and CJ isn't on the table, like what is the trade? Like I know Jimmy's value isn't very high right now because the Wolves have no leverage with Glenn Taylor basically coming out and saying you have to trade in the next couple of days. But like, what are they going to trade? Like Evan Turner and Myers Leonard for no. There's no trade that makes sense at all for the Timberwolves that doesn't involve CJ. Both from a money standpoint and from a talent standpoint.
I'm totally on board with the idea of CJ for Butler makes sense talent-wise, the shape of the team, all that stuff. But I don't think if you're Portland, you go to the Timberwolves with CJ. Like I don't think you need to make the Godfather offer. I think you need to understand, and the GMs. I mean, they're talking. They know what offers are on the table. So I think you start. With the appetizer. I mean, you got to see. You don't come with the best offer right out. Like for somebody like Kawhi, I can see that happening because obviously Kawhi's younger and he's a better player than Jimmy. I mean, Jimmy's a fantastic player, but Kawhi, I mean, you start with if Kawhi's on the table, you start with CJ. Like I get that, the younger, better, all the things that go along with that. But if you're Portland, like. I don't think it's a great package, but I think they could put a package together of Harkless, Aminu, one of the young kids, and a first-round pick. And I think Minnesota has to at least listen, depending on what else is on the table. If Miami's offering Winslow, Richardson first, and then the salary filler necessary to make that work, that's probably a better package because Richardson's got the most upside probably of anybody that I've heard mentioned so far. But like I said, I don't feel like the grand offers are out there, and I look at it more like how OKC and Indiana work their deal, where Oladipo is the Richardson in this case, where you're looking at a young kid or younger guy who's got a ton of upside who maybe in Minnesota flourishes,
and who also already signed a big contract, so he's locked up long term.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it looks like that's the kind of deal that Minnesota's probably going to opt for, but I think Portland could at least get Minnesota to go, okay, I'm listening, but beyond that, I'm not certain that they have really the ammunition to really make anything happen without adding CJ.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, and I don't think that the Blazers would end up putting CJ. I just don't think I agree. I think if it gets to the point where they make that first offer like you talked about that's based around like Aminu and Harkless and whatever else, and the Timberwolves are like, okay, maybe, and then they go to Miami and they get a better deal with Richardson and Winslow and a pick or whatever, and then they come back to Neil and they say, okay, we'll do it with you if you put in CJ. I still think Neil ultimately would say no because CJ's his guy and he doesn't like to trade his guys.
No, I don't disagree. I just think that if Minnesota's in a position, and let's say Portland does swap. Maybe Glenn Taylor opts and says, you know what, we want to move on from Jimmy, get a decent amount of talent in return, but more importantly, we want to move. If we're moving Jimmy, we want to move off from Deng's contract. If Portland's willing to take Gorgie back and swap for Myers to eat another year, but to get Jimmy, I think that's a riskier play to keep CJ and to eat that money because then you're going into luxury tax.
Deng is also a better player than Myers Leonard, though.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that, but you're also going to pay $5.5 or $6 million more a year, and then you've got to look at what it's going to cost to pay Jimmy going forward. So you're going to have Dame, CJ, and Jimmy all at $25+ million a year. So you're going to have $75 to $80 million tied up in those three guys.
That only lasts 1 year,
scary.
right? Though, because would only be here for 1 more year, right? Unless Portland was able to sign him for $190 million. Okay. Do y'all think that he's gonna get that next year?
Oh, he will.
Somebody will.
He'll get it. I wouldn't want to be the team that gives it to him, but he'll get it.
So that's. Tell me a little bit more about that. About that contradiction there. Like, why will somebody give it to him if you don't think that he's? I mean, it's not. I don't want to say worth it, but like things seem a little risky right now, especially with his age.
Right now, Jimmy Butler is absolutely worth all the money that you can possibly give him. He's a top, 10 to 12 player in the league. He's a two-way threat. He's one of the best wing defenders in the league. He's a first option on offense. All of that. He is, I think he's 29 now. He's almost 30. If you look at the history of guys who have played a lot of minutes under Tom Thibodeau and just kind of, in that kind of environment, guys, Luol Deng, Joakim Noah, those types of guys. When they get on their third contract, they don't age well. So it would be a situation where you give Jimmy that 5-year deal. The first 2 years are going to be great because he's still going to be this max guy playing at this level. And then the last 2 or 3 years of the deal, it's going to get kind of ugly because you're going to be paying him $40 million or 35 to $40 million for his ages, 33, 34, 35 seasons. And that's going to get a little ugly. That's the part of it that I would not feel great about. But the other thing is, like, the other side of it is, like, if you're a team like the Knicks or the Nets or the Clippers that don't really get big free agents, and you can get a guy like Jimmy Butler, who is, as of right now, a top 10 or 12 player in the league. It's kind of the same. It's kind of the same dilemma that the Rockets had when they were re-signing Chris Paul, or when the Grizzlies were re-signing Mike Conley a couple of years ago. Where if you're a team like that, you're not going to get anybody better than that, in free agency. So if you can sign the guy, you deal with the back end of the contract being not aging well to get the guy who's really good right now. If you're trying to win right now, and if you're the Blazers, like, Damian Lillard has 3 years left on his deal. After this year, he'll have 2 years left on his deal. You want him to be happy long-term, and the way to make him happy long-term is to say, look, we're serious. We're going to pay Jimmy Butler to stick around. We're going to spend money to stay competitive while you're in this window, because then maybe he'll want to sign an extension, because you don't want Dame to end up just, deciding he wants a trade and him wanting to leave. Like that. That's kind of how it works.
Let me ask one more question about the Blazers and the Timberwolves possibly doing some kind of a deal. Do you think that they would really deal within their own division, like in that big of making that big of a move, like even within this already totally brutal division?
They don't want to.
I think they would prefer not to, but I also I'm never a fan of the whole saying, oh, guys don't want to trade within their division, or they don't want to trade within. You're going to make the best. I mean, this is what I was saying when all the Kawhi stuff was going on, when it was like the report was that he only wanted to go to the Lakers. The Lakers didn't really have any incentive to make a real offer for him. But, there was this talk going around that, the Spurs don't want to trade with the Lakers. They don't want to trade. If the Lakers had put, like, Kyle Kuzma and Brandon Ingram on the table, I think Kawhi Leonard would be on the Lakers right now. I think, if you're a team and you're trading away a guy, you can't worry about, like, it's just like, you can't worry about, like, oh, who's he going to? Your only job is to worry about who you're getting back. Now, as far as not wanting to trade, I realize it's kind of not the same thing, because it's more of a personal thing, and it's more of like, and they weren't in the same conference. But I was shocked when the Bulls traded Jimmy to the Timberwolves in the first place, just because of how ugly things were at the end between Bulls management and Tibbs. And it was just like, there's no way, like, if the Bulls are going to, trade Jimmy, that means that they're going to admit that they, the roster that they put together was flawed and it wasn't going to contend. And so they're going to start their rebuild by giving their best player to the guy that they hate and they fired under really ugly circumstances. And that trade ended up happening because it was the best deal that the Bulls had on the table for Jimmy at the time.
No? Dan, do you have any more questions about anything else you want to discuss about the Jimmy Butler situation?
Not really, because it's such a weird situation, and there is a little bit of personal. Well, not only that, there is some personal stuff, I think, still between the Timberwolves and the Blazers. So if you think back, there were some lawsuits and things.
Oh, I mean, like all the
Martell Websters. Yeah.
Wait, can you explain a little bit what lawsuits?
Yes, I mean, you take this one, Sean.
The 2010 draft, when this was the year that Kevin Pritchard was told he was fired right before the draft, and Paul Allen still made it through the draft, which is one of the most underrated. Like that doesn't get talked about enough anymore as like one of the weirdest things about it. But anyway, so that draft, he trades Martell Webster to the Timberwolves for, I think, the number, 14, whatever pick it was. They took Luke Babbitt with that pick. And then after all of that, then after that trade went down, like later on that summer, like it turned out that Martell Webster was going to have back surgery. And so then, the people with the Timberwolves were accusing the Blazers of being misleading with his medicals and selling them damaged goods on purpose, and that was a whole thing. And then I think the fact that another part of this also, like there was more stuff later on, like a couple of years later when the Timberwolves gave that offer sheet to Nicholas Batum that Portland ended up matching, but like that was a thing where like.
And where did Brandon Roy go?
Yeah, Brandon Roy. That was the other one I was going to bring up that same summer. Like he goes. Soda and that kind of messes with his medical retirement with the amnesty money and all that, and their insurance's ability to pay it off. So there is some history, but I don't think at this point that would really factor into it. Like I think if the Blazers come with the best offer for Jimmy Butler, then the Timberwolves aren't going to not take the best offer they can, because I mean this is such a disaster for the Timberwolves already, just with the way everything played out.
They need a win,
right. Right, and I mean, if you get a guy like CJ McCollum, like let's say that the Blazers end up coming with CJ, I don't think that's going to happen because as we talked about, I don't think Neil's going to do that. But let's say that is what comes out of it. That's about the best way you can save face if you're Minnesota. You can say, look, CJ McCollum, he's an all-star caliber, 20 points a game scorer. He's going to be the new, backcourt guy to put alongside Wiggins on the wing, and then Towns in the front court, that's something you can sell to the fan base as, hey, this was a disaster, but at least we got like a star level player out of it. That's a win for them. But I don't think they would walk away from that just because like Martell Webster's back was messed up 8 years ago or whatever.
I just always look at it and go, never underestimate the pettiness of the NBA.
Yeah, but like
I mean that was 8 years ago, and Instagram didn't even exist back then.
The Suns traded Steve Nash to the Lakers. Like that's like that. This stuff happens. The Cavs traded Kyrie Irving to the Celtics after they had just played in the conference finals, and then they knew that was the biggest threat to them in the playoffs in the East. They're going to take the best deal that's available to them.
Well, I can't wait to see how this all turns out. And you got to think it's going to be soon. And then the question...
I would be shocked if it wasn't within the next, 72 hours that a Jimmy trade gets done.
I was going to put it at 48.
Yeah, I thought it was going to happen before the weekend was over.
And if you're making me guess where he goes, I don't have, inside information about this. If I had to guess, I think Miami is probably the team that does it. I think because, the other thing is, you think about, okay, maybe the Clippers, but, if you're talking about teams besides, I think the Portland thing is a long shot. I know they've been kind of talked about as a team that's interested, but out of the teams that are seriously, thought of as being really in the mix, Miami has the most. I made this point on Twitter earlier. Miami has the most incentive to actually not lowball them and actually give them a real offer, because the Knicks and the Nets and the Clippers and all these other teams that might want to sign him, Philly, whoever, they're all going to have cap space next summer, so they can all sit back and say, hey, we don't need to give up stuff for him because we can just go after him in the offseason. And if he wanted to come here now, he might still be interested next summer. Now, if you're the Heat, they're not going to have cap space next summer. They're kind of capped out. They have all these long-term deals with Josh Richardson, Tyler Johnson, Whiteside, Dragic, Kelly Olynyk, whoever. They have all these long-term deals on their books. They're not going to have cap space. The only way that they're going to be able to get a player of the caliber of a guy like Jimmy Butler is to trade for him. And so they kind of have to be if we're going to take a swing and get a star like that, this is our chance to do it. And so they might be more inclined to actually step up and give a competitive offer.
And the thing is, with Miami being the landing spot, you've got Wade on his way out, and Wade and Jimmy are tight. Marquette guys play together in Chicago. They vacationed together when Jimmy got traded to Minnesota.
They're very close.
Yeah. And then you throw in the fact that it's, number one, it's Miami. Number two, the money's better in Florida than anywhere else in the country. So you get all the tax breaks.
Florida and Texas both have no state tax.
So, I mean, if you were to look at like all of the reasons that stack up, and then basketball-wise, like Miami's always kind of there. And like if you're playing for a Pat Riley franchise, I don't think you're ever going to have a team that's going to be out there where Jimmy's going to be like, you aren't competing enough.
That's the thing, and that's the thing. Like, and whenever anybody asks me what the what the source of all of this tension is between Jimmy and some of the young guys, I covered Jimmy for 4 years in Chicago, and none of what's going on in Minnesota at all is surprising to me from the standpoint. I mean, the way that Jimmy's wired, Jimmy is like, out of like the all-star guys in the league, like the all-NBA type of like players, Jimmy is kind of unique in that he was the only one of these guys. Because if you look at who like the top players in the league, it's like, Kevin Durant, LeBron, Steph Curry, Anthony Davis, whoever, all these guys, they were all like superstar recruits from the time they were like 12 years old. They were all like these huge AAU guys. They all had these huge scholarships. They were all high draft picks. Jimmy Butler played at junior college before he got the offer from Marquette. He was the 30th pick in the draft. And he basically worked his way up from being like a fringe role player to being, a top 10 type of guy in the league, like an all-NBA type of talent. And
he was a 75th rated shooting guard in the state of Texas his senior year of high school.
Yeah, exactly. Like he went from and his whole upbringing. Like, you guys know all about his upbringing. He was basically homeless when he was a teenager, and then he basically worked his way up from that to being the level of NBA superstar that he is right now. And he looks around and he's like, if I'm working this hard, why isn't everybody else working this hard? And so he's kind of wired like Kobe in the sense that he works harder than anybody, and he doesn't really have patience for anybody who doesn't work as hard as he does. And so, whether this is fair or not, when he sees Karl Anthony-Towns playing Fortnite after a loss instead of watching film, like that's something that he doesn't really respect or have any patience for. Whether you can say what you want about like, they're kids, they want to play video games, it's fine, but like to Jimmy Butler, it's not fine because he worked as hard as he did to get where he is, and he just doesn't understand why everybody else can't work as hard as he can. That's why he and Thibodeau are so tight, because they're wired the exact same way. And so you go to Miami, like that's exactly a good point about that, because like Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra, like the whole quote unquote Heat culture, like Udonis Haslem is still there as far as like that's going to be the kind of culture and the kind of environment that theoretically Jimmy's going to thrive in.
Yeah.
I'm really anxious to see how Karl Anthony-Towns plays next year. I'm really anxious to see if like that unleashes him or if he just kind of continues on in the same vein as he goes now. But let's pivot back to the Blazers, because I'm wondering, Sean, what you touched super briefly on the Blazers offseason and how basically not a lot has changed for them. I'm wondering for you, what do you see as like the best case scenario and the worst case scenario? Not necessarily like number of games, but kind of like in terms of storylines.
I mean, I think they could be a 5, 6, 7 seed in the East, or in the West rather, where they make the playoffs. I don't think they're going to have another run where they get to the 3rd seed in the West. Like, I think it's pretty clear they're behind at this point. Golden State, Houston, Oklahoma City, and Utah, and then probably the Lakers, just because the Lakers have LeBron. And for all the other stuff with the Lakers, they still have LeBron, so I'm going to put them ahead of the Blazers. But so I think they could either be in the mix for one of those last few playoff spots with teams like San Antonio or Denver or New Orleans or maybe Minnesota, probably not Minnesota, but like some of these other ones, or they could just miss the playoffs and they win 42, 43 games as a respectable record, and then get the 9th or 10th seed in the West.
What do you think? And do you think that because one of the things I've been sort of fixated on the last few weeks is trying to figure out the schemes that the Blazers have been playing consistently for like the last 3 years. Like, they've been playing, in my opinion, a very similar type of ball every year. Do you think that, the fact that they didn't, really bring in any, big names or anything? Do you think that signals that they're just going to keep rolling out the same thing? And my question for both of you is, like, how long can you do that before everybody goes, oh, we know exactly what the Blazers are doing. We don't even need to, like, look at the playbook anymore because they're playing the same plays? Or is this somehow a benefit to have that much consistency?
You want to take that one, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think there's a couple things at play here. First of all, like, nobody complains about the consistency or the lack of change if you're doing it while winning. Like, nobody's like, oh, here goes Pop again, winning 55 games. What a jerk, you know? But in the Blazers case, because it's the bars has been lower, you're not. I'm not like looking at it like it's this wonderful thing, but because they're stuck in personnel wise, it's really limited to what they can do. I wrote about it this week, like a couple of different storylines going into preseason. And I think this is where really the wrinkles are going to come from, because Stotts is fantastic for coming up with wrinkles and tweaks in the game plan to get basically good to great results and getting the most out of players. Like, the Blazers over the last couple of years, whether it was Mason Plumlee or Yusuf Nurkic, have had some of the best at-the-rim field goal percentage defense in the league. Like, the fact that you can do that with both Mason Plumlee and Yusuf Nurkic says, I think, more about the system than it does about those individual players to a certain respect.
Wait. I have a question for you on that, about the system between when Mason Plumlee was here and when Yusuf Nurkic was here. As I recall, and maybe you can probably tell me this better. So I recall when Mason Plumlee played for the Blazers, there were almost always two guys under the basket. And they were short a person on the perimeter because an extra person was playing under the basket. And one of the things that did change, one of the few changes that we've seen, is that Nurkic is now able to guard the basket by himself, so they have more people available to guard the perimeter. Am I?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what happened. I mean, the difference is Portland has and really through the entire Stotts era, want to take away two things: corner threes and shots at the rim. Obviously, there were other weaknesses when Plumlee was here, but they still found a way to defend at the rim, which is something that, I mean, they were the best in the league at by a long or a strong differential last year. But I think with the kind of the storylines going into this season is, if, in fact, the Blazers are going to play Zach Collins at the 5, if, in fact, they are going to play Maurice Harkless at the 4, those are the bigger wrinkles this year. Because if that's the case, you're going to have a lineup out there that's going to have a bunch of guys that are between, Seth Curry, 6'1", 6'2", and then you have all the way up to Zach Collins at 7 foot tall. And that sounds more like a lineup that's going to be doing some switching. And that would be a huge swing from what we've seen from Portland's defensive principles in the past. And if they opt to go that way, I mean, that would be, the most radical change I think I've seen in the Stotts era, save when they really tried to push tempo really hard 2 years ago. And other than that, I think with Stotts, you're getting what you're getting. You're getting those successful results, and they just find ways to do it by plugging in different personnel, because the system is kind of what it is, and it's been effective and successful. So why really mess with it?
But you're thinking more switching might be the wrinkle this year, but it's not because our personnel has their personnel has changed that dramatically, but they're now adding switching. And if they do add switching, that's a pretty big change, even though the personnel stayed pretty consistent.
Yeah, just by virtue of adding Collins, because Mason Plumlee tried to do that to some extent. I mean, he was much more willing than I'd say Yusuf Nurkic, which means you're going to have two different, very, very, very different styles of defense between Nurkic and Collins. Collins is going to, in theory, offer you the flexibility to make something happen as far as switching on the perimeter, whereas Nurkic is going to be much more of the ice defense that we see, or that we've seen for the last few years.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot too. Sean, what do you think about the continuity and just the way Coach adds wrinkles here and there, or maybe might make a wholesale change?
Well, there's just how many changes can you make when the roster is going to stay the same as it is? Their hands are just kind of tied because of all the money that is tied up in all these contracts. There's not really a lot of moves that they could have made. I would have brought Ed Davis back, but I mean, really all they can do is, unless you're going to trade CJ and really, make a huge change, all you can really do is bring this team back and hope that, the continuity just kind of stays there and they're somehow better.
Mm-hmm. Dan, I had a question for what? Dan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Dara, I can always hear you.
Well, you were so quiet. You're so uncharacteristically quiet.
I'm not uncharacteristically quiet. I've given mine, so
this is going to be the worst podcast for Dan to edit.
I know, and I'm like, I don't know why Tara's deviating from what she normally does. When there's silence, she normally steps right in with another question.
All right.
I'm leaving it there for you. Like, take it.
Okay, I thought of another wrinkle that Stotts might try this season, and here is what it is. I'm wondering what you guys think. So I was doing a piece about the Blazers' transition offense and just trying to figure out, okay, like how little of it was there, and trying to just see what stories the numbers told. So I was trying to figure out with the personnel that were lost this season, Napier gone, Connaughton gone, a couple of guys who did participate in what little transition there was, like who's going to step in for those and fill those roles. And I was watching Seth Curry from his year at Dallas, where he, of course, had his most successful year, played the most games, and shot like 42% from three. Anyway, one of the things that I noticed in him, when he was in transition, really good at getting to his spot to shoot a really fast three. And as I watched him do it over and over again, in the highlights or whatever, I thought, that looks a lot like Alan Crabb. And I was thinking that maybe last year one of the reasons that the transition numbers went down so dramatically is because Alan Crabb had been contributing in a way that we didn't have anybody to really exactly fill that role. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I mean, that's partially true because Crabb was one of their leading point getters in transition because of, just who he is athletically. I mean, Portland just doesn't have or hasn't had over the last few years anybody in that real 6'4" to 6'7", 6'8" rangy guy who could put the ball on the floor. Like the only guy who fits that particular skill set on the entire Blazers roster right now that you can like remotely count on in the open floor is Maurice Harkless. Alan Crabb was the only other guy before that who could really make that happen. So yeah, I mean that's I think that's part of it. As far as Curry is concerned, like he's for the entirety of his offensive purpose. I've seen a lot of people say that Shabazz is, it's going to be tough to replace Shabazz. No, it's not. Like, I love Shabazz. I think he was a nice player. I think he was playing for a contract on the way out. That's why you saw some of his minutes and his effectiveness kind of fall off towards there at the end. I think that may be a concern with Seth Curry this year because he's basically doing the same thing. But I think already, just like on a baseline level, Seth is a better offensive version than Shabazz. And I think that he will allow Portland to push the pace a little bit more if they want to, because he's much more of a threat from the three-point line and as just a shooter in general. And I think he's going to have a greener light than Shabazz with the second unit than Shabazz ever did. So the opportunity exists for him to both in the open court and in the half court kind of push the pace a little bit and take shots pretty freely, especially with the second unit. If it is going to be something that's, a flexible, more of a positionless unit, I think he's going to be the one on the floor who's going to be the primary shooter or play ender. So, yeah, I mean, being able to replicate those points or create the points that Alan Crabb at one point in time may or may not have brought to the Blazers, I don't think it's too much of a stretch for him to be able to do. But I don't think in the grand scheme of things, I mean, still, it's a Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum dominated offense. And on the back end, you got Jusuf Nurkic. And Jusuf isn't running up and down the floor like Anthony Davis anytime soon. So I don't think Portland's ever going to be up there in the points per game in transition. But I think they will always find a way to be a points per possession up there towards the top of the league. So when they get their opportunities, they'll capitalize on them, but they don't create them and they don't really look to find them all that often. But if you wanted to look for like the candidate that's most likely, it's going to be Harkless, because if you put Harkless at the 4, then yeah, there should be a mismatch for him. And that's where I think the people who really want to see Harkless do well this season, that's where he has the opportunity to shine, is if he is playing at that stretch position or flex position, and he's given the opportunity to run the floor and take another bigger, maybe slower, lumbering guy at the 4 out of position, either in the open court or in just, off of even a made basket, then I think that's an opportunity more so than even for Seth Curry.
Yeah, Harkless was definitely involved in a lot of them. But one more thing that you just brought up that I'll point out is when I was looking at the numbers 2 years ago, and that would have been when Crabbe was on the team, their points per possession were actually quite high in the league. That was like everything was, bottom 10 or almost all of it was bottom 5, except for 2 years ago, the field goal percentage and the points per possession was a lot higher. And I like, just as I was wrapping it up, I was like, I wonder if that was because that was Alan Crabbe and he just had more success 2 years ago than the players from last year.
I mean, that's basically it right there. I mean, you've got a guy who is a 40% 3-point shooter. It isn't, and his opportunities are mostly coming from, either down screens in the half court or from transition. And in those moments, that's where he's going to capitalize.
Sean, what do you think? Your turn. What are the Blazers going to show us in terms of play types or new wrinkles that they might add next season?
I mean, I think the transition thing is huge. Like they just haven't had anybody like that. And I mean, I think what you were saying as far as Seth Curry maybe being the guy that could come in and give them kind of that look that they haven't had the last couple of years, or at least they haven't really had since Alan Crabbe left. Like that, I think that's the main thing I'm going to be looking for. Otherwise, I'm really not sure what I can see as far as like changes they can really make given the personnel that they have.
Sauce Castillo ain't running the break anytime soon.
No.
Well,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love me some Sauce, but if anybody's looking for that, stop.
Yeah, and I'm not looking for a huge increase, at least in attempts or in percentage of plays, coming from transition. That's just not how this team has ever been since Stotts took over and since before that.
It's not how it's built. It's not how it's built. Like, there's nobody on this team. Like, the closest thing they've had to a guy who likes to get out and push pace or has the ability to push pace and create his own turnovers, the last time Portland had anybody like that was Nick Batum. He was the only guy. Like, I love Wes. I love Brandon Roy's my favorite Blazer of all time. Neither one of those guys were guys that really push the pace. I mean, you get a point guard in Steve Blake not pushing the pace. Andre Miller not pushing the pace. Yeah, like this is the guys that Portland has brought in over like the last decade. None of them push pace.
Do you guys know the last
how
time
they've been built?
The last time the Blazers were in the top 10 in transition or in fast break points?
Had to be like in the early 2000s, like Damon Stoudemire, right?
Yeah, it was 2004-05.
Yeah, that sounds about
Oh
right.
God, that team.
That was
was a fun team.
They were number 9.
Good God. That team, that's probably the only way that team scored.
Okay, Sean, I have another question for you that's very important to this podcast, how you answer. Very, very important. And this is about the future of Zach Collins. Is he going to be more like Rasheed Wallace or Kevin McHale? Dan wants to know.
Is he ever going to get 41 technical fouls in a season? That's what I want to know.
I don't know. He's a little gritty.
If he did that, I would reverse my position on Zach Collins.
You would be showing up and bringing him his coffee every morning.
Is he gonna threaten a referee out on the loading dock after a game? I'm just gonna go with
towel in somebody's face.
I get what you're going for with this question, but nobody's ever gonna be like Rasheed Wallace.
Yeah, no. But seriously though, what do you think that we might see? What's a reasonable expectation, do you think, for next year from Zach Collins? Given the major change of no Ed Davis.
I think he's pretty clearly a rotation big at the very least. Like I think he's a guy you saw during the New Orleans series. he did a better job of staying on the floor against Anthony Davis than pretty much anybody else in the front court that they had out there. He's a guy. Obviously, he's a rookie. He's still getting better. He's going to still make some mistakes. He was a rookie last year, rather. But I think he's a guy who has looked at times like he belongs out there in the NBA. He can step out and shoot it a little bit. I think he's. I don't know if you can say, this is definitely your starting center going forward. But I think he's at least a third big. You could comfortably throw him out there and say, okay, he can be your third big.
Third big as in all bigs, or third big as in center?
No, as in all bigs.
Okay.
No, as in all bigs.
Okay. So that's pretty.
And he could become a starter too.
Yeah, and all this talk about, let's see, what did they say that they were going to use him for over the summer? One of the earlier press conference was that they were going to use him more down low on the block.
Yeah, they said they were going to put him closer to the rim. That was the thought. They didn't really specify anything more than that, but
What do you think the tea leaves say about that, Sean?
Well, I think when you have a center who can step out and hit a three, like that's the way the league is going, unless they want to just completely zig while everybody else is zagging, like you kind of have to let him play to his strengths a little bit. So I'll be interested to see what they whether they actually stick to that, or whether it's one of those things where, like they say, the first couple weeks of the season, oh yeah, we're going to play him closer to the rim, and then as the season goes on, they just kind of drift back out to what he was normally doing.
I really liked what you said earlier, Dan. Like I said, I've been thinking about it a lot. The fact that they're going to have two really different styles of play, probably based on their center. They're going to have the Jusuf Nurkic lineup, and then when Zach Collins come on, they're going to be really doing something different. And I guess it's going to be predicted on who they're playing, whether or not they want to use it, Myers Leonard as another big body to come in after Nurkic to play that style, or I guess Zach Collins and maybe somebody else playing another small center. I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to have different options.
Yeah, they have different options, but they're also really limited, because the only two quote unquote centers they have are Jusuf Nurkic and Myers Leonard. Mm-hmm. Now you could say that the Collins can in theory play it. Sure, fine, okay. Beyond that, the next big is Caleb Swanigan and Jake Layman. That is your front court. So you've got some mix and match, some different styles, some distinctly different styles, but you're limited in how you can mix and match them. And so I think those are going to be the big unique storylines, I think, for this season, because the depth is so shallow there. But I just want to kind of wrap this one up, because we were going a little long with how technology is working right now, but I want to get to the media day stuff, because I know, Sean, you're going to be there tomorrow.
That is the plan.
What are the things that you look forward to from not just this media day, but media day in general? Do you sit there with a bingo board counting all the cliches, or?
Oh, absolutely. Who's in the best shape of their life? Who's really, my favorite one is everybody saying oh, I worked on my 3-point shot this summer. Every big man says that, or every single thing is there's so many that you can say I'm just really happy to be in this situation. It's just the NBA draft combine, which is an event I cover every year. There's cliches where every team's beat writer is going to ask how they think they'd fit in with this team, and the answer is always, oh, I think I'd fit in great with that team. There's just certain standbys that you're always going to see at training camp. We just think we're really gonna, I'm gonna really take the leap this year, or I put on this much muscle, muscle watch. Shout out Lane Whitaker, that's always a big thing.
Do you have a go-to question on media day?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna ask.
I'm not really out here asking those types of, I'll always, if I have somebody that's I'm trying to write about, that I have a specific thing to ask, and that's kind of more the direction I go. I'm not really big on asking questions in the big, group sessions.
Who asks the best ones?
Yeah.
I haven't been to a Blazers media day yet, actually. The previous media days I've been in Chicago, so I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Oh yeah, you can compare and see who has better food and who's faster and more efficient getting everybody in and out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
So when you look at it at tomorrow, and again, we're recording Sunday night here, so media day is tomorrow morning. What are the things that you're hoping to gain from the first real media availability of this team this year?
Honestly, just some sense of, what the plan is as far as, are they going to just, we were talking about the continuity earlier. And I mean, obviously Terry's not going to talk about, strategy or lineups in the first day of training camp, but I want to know what their plan is. Like, do they really think just, we're going to run this back? This team that we have this year is going to be, I want to know kind of what they think about, the how competitive the East or the West is still, after, especially with LeBron coming to the Lakers, all this kind of stuff, like, and, these moves that everybody else made, like, I really want to see how they see themselves. And it's like, do they really think they're going to be the 3 seed again if they just keep the same team together? Or I'm just really curious to see how Neil Olshey tries to spin it.
I bet I wouldn't be surprised if we heard from the players still smarting from the playoffs.
Ed Davis.
No, from the playoffs. I think that really I think the way that the season ended, had a huge impact on them, and I hope every one of them comes out saying, we got a lot to prove after what happened in the playoffs last year. I hope everyone, I'm guessing that those guys are so competitive that they've probably been thinking about that all summer. I wonder if they mention it.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. There's always, like, if you want to talk about just like questions you want to ask guys about the summer, there's all this weird stuff with Dame, or just the funny stuff with like the breaking news about different reporters going to the Athletic, or his workout videos that he like posted as like a parody of the workout videos, or like CJ's podcast thing with Kevin Durant and all that. There's going to be more lighthearted stuff that media day is kind of the time to get all that stuff out of the way before everybody's really just focused on basketball.
I remember a couple years ago, it wasn't on media day, but it was like on the first courtside, or the show that they would host once a week throughout the summer, and they'd get coaches or whatever to come on. And the one right before media day, this totally stuck in my head. They had Terry Stotts on, and they were like, "What you going to work on this year, Coach?" And he said that they were going to be working on defense, and he said super casually, he said, "We're going to work on going under screens some more. We're going to do some switching. We're going to stay in our shell," which I imagine are probably 3 like pretty standard things. But for some reason that really stuck with me because they were like super specific. And those are actually things that I saw develop throughout the year. So I hang on like every word that Stott says, because I think that he absolutely says things exactly like that are so straightforward that you just almost kind of think, well, duh. But then like they actually are what he goes out and does. Like the night that he doesn't like to give away too much of his game plan though. Like there will be times where we'll be at a game and they'll say, "So who's starting tonight?" and he just like won't even tip his hand. Mm-hmm. Even if it's like the most obvious thing. He kind of reminds me of Tom Thibodeau in that way. He would just hate, like, he thinks that just like answering routine questions before a game is like giving away strategy, as if the other team hasn't already like gone through the whole scouting report on your team and isn't ready for whatever. Doesn't have everything available to call up on their iPad
right, exactly.
Immediately.
Right, exactly.
Well,
yeah.
But I remember a couple of years ago, too, one night before the Blazers played Golden State, and this was a game that the Blazers ended up coming out and like beating the socks off them. It was like a January game or something. And somebody said, "Coach, what's the key to winning this game?" And he goes, "Well, we're going to outscore them." But like that's exactly what but it was one of the but it was so clear that what he meant by that is like we're putting our entire offense out there, and defense will happen when it happens, but we're concentrating on just racking up as many points, more points than they are. Which I thought was like,
right.
It sounded like such a not actual answer, but I think that was exactly what his plan was.
Troll Stotts is my favorite Stotts.
Dan, are you?
Yeah, no, he has that side.
Oh no, he can flip into the Belichickian curmudgeon better than almost any coach in the league. Like Tibbs has the crown. There's no doubt about it.
Well, that's just how Tibbs is, like for real.
Yeah. That's what I mean. And Pops is more of a gimmick than anything else. But Stotts knows how to turn it on.
At the end of there was a little consternation at the end of the season, some in the middle of the season, about Stotts' position. I'm looking around and seeing what's going on in Minnesota, and I'm suddenly not that worried about Stotts. Do you guys think Tibbs sticks around Timberwolves?
I think he'll coach the rest of the season, and then he's gone next summer. Yeah. Well, because what are they going to gain from firing him now? Like, this whole thing is such a mess. If you're going to fire him, you do it today or like tomorrow.
Yeah, you do it now.
They trade Jimmy. That's when you do it. You don't go into the season and then, they got off to this kind of underwhelming start when there was all this drama. And now we're going to no, I think he's going to last I think he's going to coach this whole season, and then he's going to get fired like the day. It's going to be one of those ones because they're not going to make the playoffs. Like you know how like when this year, like the night that of the last night of the regular season, like the last game ends, and then Jeff Hornacek gets fired by the Knicks, and then Frank Vogel gets fired by Orlando. Tibbs, I think, is going to be like one of those first ones, like right at the end of the regular season.
It's going to be the tweet that's going to be already scheduled tweet ready to go,
like from Woj.
Yeah, 11:59 p.m.
Yeah,
Thibodeau has been fired.
I just can't believe with the state of things, and with him being both the general manager and the coach, and having
they're going to strip that title away. They're going to strip the GM title away.
They haven't yet.
This whole thing is just, and this is a point I've been hammering over and over again the last few days. This is like this whole mess that the Timberwolves are in is why you cannot make the coach also have personnel control. Because if you're a coach, especially when you're a guy like Tom Thibodeau, whose entire coaching philosophy is we have to do every single thing and put every single thing out there every single night. When you're a coach, your job is to win that day with the players you have. When you're the GM, your job is to be like, what's our draft pick situation? What's our cap situation? Like, what's our long-term outlook going to be? They're opposite jobs. And the other part of it is that, when you have, a player that, you see every day in practice as the coach, you're so emotionally invested in them that even when you should trade them. Like, I remember this, my first year covering the Bulls in 2013-14, the year that Derrick Rose tore the meniscus like 10 games into the season. Like, it was pretty clear like they weren't going to contend that year after that injury happened. And so in January, they traded Luol Deng to the Cavaliers. And you could just tell the next morning at shoot-around, Tibbs was so just demoralized about the trade. And he was saying like, it's a business. We have to put the best. Like, you could tell he just was not happy about the trade. Objectively, it was exactly the right trade to make because, they had to get under the luxury tax. He was going to leave that summer anyway. Like, it was a smart trade to make at the time. But if Tibbs had been the one making the trade, he wouldn't have made the trade because he's too attached to Luol Deng. And so you can't have it unless it's a situation like the Spurs. Like, the Spurs are such an exceptional case because basically Pop just sits back and is like, completely trusts R.C. Buford to do the day-to-day stuff, and then Pop just has a say in things before they pull the trigger on stuff. That's the only way that can work. But if you look at like how it went with Stan Van Gundy in Detroit, how it went with Doc Rivers with the Clippers, how it went with Mike Budenholzer in Atlanta before they brought in Travis Schlenk last year, like it's like you can't have the coach also have personnel control. And I think this whole Tibbs thing, maybe Tibbs stays as the coach. And the Woj story from yesterday said that Glenn Taylor had been thinking about firing Scott Layden and making some changes in the front office. If Tibbs is going to stay on, you have to strip him of the personnel control. But is he going to be willing to do that? I don't know. It's going to be a whole thing to see.
It is going to be a whole thing to see. And like I said earlier, my heart and sympathies are with the Timberwolves fans because, they should have been, flying high after making the playoffs. And it's just one of those things, a reminder about how quickly things can change. And, that old, there but for fortune go you or I, right?
Yeah, I took the under on the Blazers. With this deal, if it does go through and Butler goes to the Eastern Conference, I'm going to regret taking the under because that's a couple more wins for Portland at the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe one team might not be so competitive in the Northwest Conference. Maybe. Yeah. We'll see. Then there's the other three that the Blazers still have to contend with. Well, should we go ahead and wrap it up? Dan, any other questions for Sean while we've got him?
No, nothing that I can say on air.
that kind of sums up my relationship with Dan. Yeah, we talk about a lot of stuff. Nothing you can say on air.
Yeah.
All right then. Well, Sean, you want to tell folks how they can find your work?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at Highkin, which is just my last name, Highkin. Everything I tweet, or everything I write, I'm going to tweet it out. So you just catch me on there. I'll be around, and I'll be at Media Day tomorrow, tweeting out quotes and pictures and all that kind of stuff.
Excellent. You can find me on Twitter at TCBBiggs. You can also find the Women's Hoops and Talks podcast at Hoops and Talks on Twitter. And that's about all the exciting. Oh, I just finalized all of the dates for the upcoming Women's Hoops and Talks meetups.
Yes.
For the entire season. So I've got those on Twitter, and I'm about ready to start pushing out some more information about. The first one is going to be on October 27th. The Blazers are taking on Miami. So there will be more information coming out, and we're going to get together and watch the first Women's Hoops and Talks meetup game of the season coming up soon. Dan, take us out of here.
All right, folks, you can find me on Twitter at dmarang, on Instagram, everywhere else for your social media needs at DMARANG. You can also find me, Joe Simon, Shane Brennan, every game night, pre- and post-game show on NBC Sports Northwest. We've got some cool stuff coming up. Again, I can't talk about it until we make the official announcement, but look for some stuff heading into the preseason here. Other than that, just want to thank Sean for joining us. We'll have some more stuff, obviously, from Media Day tomorrow. In the meantime, folks, stay tuned. We'll have some more stuff coming up as we head into the season. Thanks for listening. Bye.